The dog stopped walking long before the crowd noticed anything was wrong. Its body stiffened, paws planted, ears tilted toward something no one else could hear, while the blind man's cane swept harmlessly over empty pavement. Laughter rippled nearby, cruel and careless, as the leash went taut and the dog leaned back, refusing to move. Its breathing changed, low and controlled, not fear but focus. Then the dog slowly stepped in front of the man, shielding him completely, eyes locked on the approaching threat. What did the dog sense that no one else could? The blind man's name was Elias, and the dog at his side had been with him long enough that their movements had blended into a single rhythm, one shaped by trust rather than sight. Elias had lost his vision years earlier in an accident that took more than light from his eyes. It stripped away independence, confidence, and the sense of safety he once carried without thinking. The dog, a lean, dark-coated shepherd mix named Rowan, had arrived later, after the long months when Elias learned that the world sounded sharper when you could no longer see it, harsher when people assumed weakness, quieter when doors closed without explanation. Rowan had been trained as a guide, but what bound them together went far beyond practiced commands. The dog learned Elias's breathing patterns, the subtle pauses in his steps, the way his shoulders tightened when unfamiliar sounds crowded too close. Every morning they walked the same route through the neighborhood, past the uneven sidewalk that Rowan carefully navigated around, past the corner where traffic surged louder and faster, past the small park where Elias liked to sit and feel the sun on his face while Rowan lay at his feet, watchful but calm. Their life was modest and predictable, built on routines that made the world manageable, and within those routines Rowan became not just a guide but an anchor, a living assurance that Elias was not alone. People noticed the dog first, always the dog, some with admiration, others with pity, a few with thinly veiled annoyance, but Rowan never reacted, never pulled, never broke the invisible boundary of focus that kept Elias safe. Lately, though, something had begun to shift. The neighborhood had grown louder in a way that felt wrong, not the ordinary noise of traffic or voices but sharp bursts of laughter that lingered too long, footsteps that slowed deliberately as they passed, the faint scrape of shoes circling instead of moving on. Elias sensed it through the way Rowan's pace changed, a half-second hesitation here, a firmer lead there, subtle adjustments that told him his dog was reading something new in the environment. On one afternoon walk, Rowan paused longer than usual near the park entrance, nose lifting into the air as if tasting something unpleasant, muscles tightening beneath his coat before he relaxed again and guided Elias forward. Another day, Rowan angled his body just enough to place himself between Elias and a cluster of voices. His calm exterior masking a tension Elias felt through the leash like a low current. Elias tried to ignore the unease, telling himself that the dog was simply being cautious, that the world had always carried risks and that Rowan had always known how to manage them, but the pattern persisted, and with it came a faint sense of being watched. The laughter grew bolder, closer, and once Elias heard something strike the pavement nearby, a small object skittering away, followed by more laughter that made his chest tighten even as Rowan remained steady, guiding him forward as if nothing had happened. The dog's behavior began to change in ways Elias could feel even without seeing, longer moments of stillness, deeper breaths drawn through flared nostrils, ears shifting constantly as though tracking movement that never fully revealed itself. Their once peaceful route started to feel like a narrow corridor closing in, and although Elias continued their walks, trusting Rowan with the same faith he always had, an unspoken tension settled between them, a quiet understanding that something was approaching, something Rowan sensed clearly and was already preparing to face. The change did not arrive all at once but gathered itself like a storm that never quite announced when it would break, beginning with small disturbances that only Rowan seemed to register fully, moments when the dog's gait slowed or his shoulders lifted just slightly, as though he were bracing against an unseen pressure. On their walks, Elias felt the leash grow heavier in Rowan's mouth, not from pulling but from intention, a subtle resistance that told him the dog was measuring distances, tracking movement, mapping sound into threat. The neighborhood's noises grew sharper in contrast, laughter snapping like twigs underfoot, footsteps no longer passing but pacing, circling, retreating, then returning with deliberate slowness. Rowan's ears rarely rested now, flicking constantly as if the air itself were speaking to him in fragments, and Elias began to sense the world tightening around them, each familiar landmark losing its comfort as the space between safety and danger thinned. One afternoon as they approached the park, Rowan stopped so abruptly that Elias nearly stumbled, the dog's body rigid and angled, his chest vibrating with a low, steady breath that Elias felt through the leash before he even realized what was happening. The air carried a strange mix of scents that made Rowan's nostrils flare, and though Elias heard only distant voices, the dog's posture told a different story, one of proximity and intent, of eyes fixed on them from somewhere just out of reach. Rowan shifted again, placing himself directly in front of Elias, blocking his path not gently but decisively, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath as Elias stood behind him, heart thudding, unsure whether to trust the pause or push forward. The tension eased only slightly when the voices drifted away, but Rowan did not relax, and Elias felt the dog's focus linger long after the sound faded, as if he were waiting for something to return. The pattern repeated in the days that followed, the unease growing heavier each time, until even the simple act of stepping onto the sidewalk felt like crossing into a space that no longer belonged to them. Rowan began adjusting their routes without prompting, guiding Elias closer to walls, away from open spaces, choosing paths that kept them moving quickly through exposed areas, and Elias, though unsettled, followed without question, trusting the instincts that had never failed him before. The laughter returned more often now, sometimes close enough that Elias could hear the sharp intake of breath that preceded it, and once he felt the air move beside his face as something passed too close to be accidental, Rowan responding instantly by stepping into him, pressing his solid weight against Elias's legs to steady him before guiding him away. The dog's calm exterior remained intact, but beneath it ran a current of vigilance so intense it seemed to hum, and Elias felt it in every shift of the leash, every pause before a corner, every sudden stop that made his pulse spike. One evening, as the light faded and the neighborhood slipped into shadows Elias could not see but Rowan could sense, the dog slowed again, head lowering, ears flattening briefly before snapping forward, his entire body aligning toward a point Elias could not identify. The air felt charged, thick with anticipation, and though Elias heard only the distant echo of voices, Rowan's muscles quivered with restraint, as if holding back a response that required perfect timing. The dog took a step forward, then another, guiding Elias carefully while keeping his body angled outward, a living barrier that moved with purpose and precision, and for the first time Elias felt a flicker of fear that went beyond unease, a realization that Rowan was no longer just anticipating danger but actively managing it. The sense of being watched intensified, pressing against Elias's awareness until even the sounds of his own footsteps felt too loud, too revealing, and Rowan's behavior grew more deliberate, his movements sharper, his breathing deeper, his attention fixed on a threat that refused to show itself fully. Then came the night when the tension finally snapped into clarity, when the laughter followed them longer than usual, footsteps matching their pace, retreating when Rowan turned his head, advancing again when they moved on. Elias felt the leash tighten as Rowan shortened the distance between them, keeping Elias close, guiding him faster without breaking into a run, and the fear that Elias had been trying to ignore surged, cold and unmistakable. The sounds drew nearer, the air shifting as bodies closed in, and Rowan stopped again, more forcefully this time, planting himself with unwavering resolve as if the ground itself had told him to stand. Elias's heart raced as the laughter cut off abruptly, replaced by a silence that felt heavier than noise, a silence that told Rowan everything he needed to know. The dog's body coiled with restrained energy, every sense sharpened to a single point of focus, and Elias felt the moment stretch, time slowing as the danger hovered just beyond his reach. Rowan's breathing steadied, his posture unwavering, and though Elias could not see what lay ahead, he could feel the dog's readiness like a shield, a promise forged not from training alone but from a bond built over years of shared vulnerability and trust. The silence broke with movement too close, too sudden, and Rowan shifted instantly, stepping forward with controlled force, his presence expanding to fill the space between Elias and whatever had come too near. The leash trembled with the dog's energy, and Elias's breath caught as the world seemed to teeter on the edge of violence, the outcome hanging precariously between restraint and action. Rowan held his ground, eyes locked on the unseen threat, body poised for a decision that would change everything, and as the tension reached a breaking point, Elias realized with a sinking certainty that whatever Rowan had been sensing all along was finally here, and the next moment would reveal whether the dog's instincts would be enough to keep them both safe. The moment broke open with a rush of movement and sound that shattered the fragile stillness, the laughter returning not as mockery now but as something sharper, closer, edged with intent, and Rowan responded before Elias could even process the shift, his body surging forward with controlled force that stopped just short of violence, a calculated interception that placed every inch of the dog between his human and the danger closing in. The air filled with hurried footsteps, bodies repositioning, the unmistakable sense of circling that Rowan had been warning against for days, and Elias felt the leash pull taut as the dog widened his stance, grounding himself like an anchor against the storm. Rowan's breathing deepened, measured and steady, his head low, eyes locked on a moving target Elias could not see, and the dog's focus narrowed to a single purpose, protecting the man who trusted him with his life. The sounds came closer still, a sudden shove of air, a hand reaching where it should not have been, and Rowan reacted in a flash, stepping into the space with explosive precision, not striking but disrupting, breaking the momentum with a force that startled even those who had intended harm. The twist revealed itself not in brute strength but in intelligence, in the way Rowan maneuvered, hurting rather than attacking, using angles and presence to create distance, to funnel the threat away from Elias and toward the open where witnesses and light made cruelty harder to hide. The bullies faltered, their confidence cracking as they realized the dog was not panicking, not reacting blindly but anticipating, responding to movements before they fully formed, and in that hesitation Rowan acted again, pressing forward just enough to force retreat, his body language unmistakable, a silent warning that crossed the boundary between fear and respect. Elias stood frozen behind him, heart pounding, every nerve screaming uncertainty, yet through it all he felt the steadiness of the leash, the unwavering line of connection that told him Rowan was in control, that whatever chaos unfolded beyond his sight was being held at bay by instincts honed through loyalty and love. The danger peaked when one figure lunged too close, a final desperate attempt to reclaim dominance, and Rowan answered with a sudden powerful movement that sent the threat stumbling back, not injured but exposed, stripped of illusion, the reality of the situation crashing down in the collective gasp that followed. The world seemed to slow as Rowan held his position, chest heaving, eyes burning with focus, daring the danger to test him again, and in that suspended moment the laughter died completely, replaced by hurried retreats and muttered sounds of defeat fading into distance. The dog did not chase, did not escalate, choosing restraint over rage, his heroism defined not by attack but by protection, by the unbreakable line he maintained between harm and the man who depended on him. As the last footsteps disappeared, Rowan turned back to Elias, pressing his head gently against the man's leg, grounding him in the aftermath, reminding him through touch that the threat was gone, that he was safe. Elias's breath came in uneven waves, emotion crashing through him as he knelt instinctively, hands finding Rowan's neck, feeling the warmth and solidity that had just stood against the darkness, and though he could not see what had happened, he understood it fully in that instant, understood that the dog had read the world in ways he never could and had chosen, without hesitation, to stand between him and harm. The neighborhood sounds returned slowly, ordinary and distant, but nothing felt the same, the space altered by what had just occurred, by the knowledge that courage did not always announce itself with noise or force. Sometimes it arrived quietly on four paws, steady and sure, and held the line when everything else threatened to collapse. And as Elias rose, guided once more by Rowan's calm presence, the truth settled deep and unshakable, that the greatest act of heroism that night was not seen by many, but it was felt completely by one man who walked forward trusting a dog who had just proven that love, instinct and loyalty could be stronger than fear itself. In the hours that followed, the world seemed to soften around them as if the night itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long, and Elias felt the aftermath not as a single wave but as a slow, trembling release that moved through his body in quiet pulses, his hands lingering on Rowan's fur long after they had resumed walking, as though letting go might allow the fear to return. Rowan guided him home with the same measured calm he always had, yet something in the dog's presence felt deeper now, heavier with meaning, each step deliberate not just in navigation but in reassurance, his shoulder brushing Elias's leg more often, his pace subtly adjusted to match the uneven rhythm of a man still finding his balance after standing so close to the edge. The neighborhood sounds faded into something distant and unthreatening, and though Elias could not see the retreating figures or the empty sidewalks they left behind, he sensed the absence clearly, a hollow where danger had been, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of safety. When they reached the small apartment that had always been their refuge, Elias sank into the familiar stillness, the walls enclosing them in quiet, and Rowan settled at his feet, not collapsing in exhaustion but remaining alert, watchful, as if the night were not yet finished testing them. The adrenaline ebbed slowly, leaving behind a profound weariness that Elias felt in his bones, yet beneath it lay something new, a clarity born of survival, an understanding that the bond he shared with Rowan had been forged not just in routine and trust but in a moment where instinct and devotion had aligned perfectly. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by memories he could not see but could feel, the echo of sudden movement, the weight of Rowan's body holding firm, and each time Elias stirred, Rowan was there, shifting closer, anchoring him back to the present with quiet persistence. Morning light arrived unnoticed by Elias but not by Rowan, who adjusted with the dawn, guiding his human through the familiar motions of the day with gentle patience, and though the route they took outside remained unchanged, everything felt subtly different, the air lighter, the ground steadier beneath Elias's feet. News of the incident spread quietly through the neighborhood, carried not by spectacle but by whispers and concerned glances, by strangers offering help without asking questions, by a sense that something important had happened even if few could fully articulate it. Elias felt the shift in the way people moved around him now, less careless, more aware, as if Rowan's silent stand had drawn an invisible line that lingered long after the danger had passed. Rowan, for his part, returned to his calm demeanor, the heightened vigilance easing but never disappearing entirely, a reminder that awareness was not fear but readiness, a gift he carried not for himself but for the man who depended on him. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night settled into something quieter, no longer a source of raw terror but a touchstone, a reminder of resilience that Elias carried with him as he rebuilt his confidence step by careful step. He noticed how his own posture changed, how his shoulders no longer curled inward as tightly when unfamiliar sounds approached, how his grip on the leash softened, not because he trusted the world more, but because he trusted Rowan completely. The dog seemed to sense this shift, responding with a lighter gait, a relaxed tail, the subtle signs of a bond deepening not through crisis alone but through the shared process of healing that followed. They resumed their visits to the park, Elias sitting on the familiar bench while Rowan lay beside him, watchful yet at ease, the sun warming them both, and in those moments Elias reflected on the strange, unspoken language they shared, a communication built not on sight or sound but on presence, on the mutual understanding that each would stand for the other without hesitation. Rowan's heroism did not transform him into something else. It revealed what he had always been, a guardian shaped by empathy as much as instinct, and Elias found comfort in that constancy, in knowing that the same dog who navigated cracked sidewalks and busy intersections had also been capable of holding back the darkness when it mattered most. Over time, the fear that had once crept into their walks loosened its grip, replaced by a cautious optimism that grew with each uneventful day, and Elias learned to listen not just to the world around him but to the subtle cues of Rowan's body, trusting that together they formed a complete picture, one that neither could create alone. The experience left a lasting mark, not as a scar but as a source of quiet strength, a reminder that vulnerability did not negate courage, and that reliance did not diminish dignity. In moments of reflection, Elias understood that the true rescue that night had not been dramatic or visible to many, but deeply personal, a reclamation of safety and agency made possible by a dog who chose, again and again, to stand between him and harm. Rowan, in turn, seemed to carry the memory as well, his protectiveness now tempered with an almost tender attentiveness, a constant awareness of Elias's emotional state that went beyond training, beyond duty, rooted firmly in love. As seasons changed and routines evolved, their bond continued to deepen, shaped by countless small moments of trust rather than the singular intensity of crisis, yet always informed by the knowledge of what they had faced together. Elias often thought about the way courage had manifested that night, not as aggression or dominance, but as restraint, intelligence, and unwavering presence, and he carried that lesson with him, allowing it to reshape how he moved through the world. The story of Rowan's stand became, for Elias, a reminder that heroism did not require recognition, that the most powerful acts often unfolded quietly, unseen by most, yet transformative for those they protected. In the end, what endured was not the fear or the threat, but the profound sense of connection forged in its wake, the understanding that even in a world that could be cruel and careless, there existed a bond so strong it could hold the line against that cruelty and emerge intact. Elias walked forward each day guided by more than a leash, guided by trust, loyalty, and the knowledge that beside him moved a being who had proven, without words or spectacle, that love could be vigilant, courage could be gentle, and that sometimes the greatest light in the darkness came not from what one could see, but from what one could feel.